Okay, so in this video, we're going to be reviewing how to define variables in MATLAB and what variables actually mean. Okay, so what is a variable? So a variable is a labeled entry in a computer program that stores the value of some kind of data. And so some common types of data that we work with, especially in MATLAB, are things like scalar values, which are just single values. They can be vectors, which are a collection of values stored as a list. It can be a matrix, which is a collection of values stored as a 2D construct. I think you know what matrices are. And also other things too. So things like if we open a file, we have to save that as a variable, so on and so forth, right? And so variables, when people think of programming, I think they think of the kind of the special keywords like for loops, if statements, all that stuff. But I think even more basic to that, and arguably I think even more useful, is a variable. And because you can't really write a program without them, right? And so when you define a variable, you kind of need two things to fully specify it. One, you need a name, and two, you need the value. And so kind of the anatomy of a variable looks like the following. And so you'll see lines like this a lot in computer codes. And so um, we have three entries here. And so on the first part we have the variable's name. And so the name of this variable is just called my variable. We have an equal sign. So the equal sign is key. So the equal sign is what's known as the assignment operator in programming. And what that's basically saying is that, whatever comes after the equal sign, assign that to the variable name. Okay. And at the end of the line, of course, we have the variable value, which is what we're going to assign to that variable. Okay. And so from now on, after this line is defined here, whenever we use the name my variable, it's going to have the value of 6. Okay. And so we can use that. And so oftentimes in MATLAB, we're interested in doing mathematical calculations, right? And so once a variable has been defined, that variable can be used for calculations later in the code by just simply using its name. Okay, so in this example here, we're going to compute the area of a rectangle. And so I'm defining one variable called length, another variable called width, okay? And then computing the area, I'm just going to do length times width, and you can see that we get an area of 60, okay? And so when you define your variables, in kind of in the interest of writing code very quickly, I think a lot of people kind of default to using very, very short variable names. So they use things like X or Y or A or B, things like that, right? And what I always tell my students is that I want you to resist the temptation to type really quickly because, the time that you spend coding, very little of that time is actually in the typing. Most of that time that you spend in coding is actually in trying to figure out what the hell, went wrong with your code. And so, what helps with that process, what helps with debugging, is using really distinct and descriptive names for your variables so that you can really easily go back and check, what went wrong in the code. So, don't use single letter variable names. Okay, and so there's a lot of things you can do with variables. One thing you can do is you can actually change its value, right? So once a variable is set, it doesn't have to keep its value, right? And so you can simply just repeat the same, assignment line and give your variable a whole different value, right? And so in this example here, I'm using the same variable, my variable, and on the first part, I just defined its value as 4. In the second part, I define its value of 6, okay? And we get different results from the computations, okay? And so the value that a variable will take on is just its most recent assignment, okay? But when you're doing this, you have to be careful because, if you're going to be reusing a variable name, you have to usually have a good reason to do it. And so if it works better to just define another variable, I would say most of the time that's often better. But there are situations when you want to reuse variable names. And so, but the purpose of this slide is just to kind of show you that it's not, the value is not set in stone, and you can still change its value after. Okay. And so last thing I'll go over is kind of a neat trick that I like to use a lot in my programming, which is updating a variable's value. Okay. Because a lot of times in programming, we use variables to act as like a counter or to count how many instances of something that happens in data. And so a lot of times we define a variable, and then each time something happens, we can kind of increment its value or update its value. And so we can do that using this kind of trick here that I think kind of throws people off when they see it for the first time. And so in this example here, we have a variable which I define my variable as 4. And let's say that I want to add 1 to it. And so the way that we do that is we say that, we use the assignment operator. We say my variable, okay, is equal to my variable plus 1. Okay, and the way to kind of read this in kind of plain human speak is say that the new value of this variable is equal to the old value of this variable plus 1. Okay, and so whenever you see the name of a variable on the right side of an equal sign, the value that it's taking is just its most recent assignment, not including this line, right? And so in this line yet, this name right here doesn't know that it's being updated, and so it's going to take the most recent value, which is 4. Okay, and so what this is going to do is that the new value of my variable is going to be 4 plus 1, which is 5 right here. Okay, and so it's a neat little trick, but I think this syntax kind of throws people off, and so I wanted to make sure I cover that in this video.